My son betrayed me. Be glad we still pick up your calls, old hag. That's what he told me last night, his wife laughing in the background. 14 years ago, I co-signed the loan for his first office. 12 years ago, I handed over the properties that built his empire. Yesterday, he mocked me. Today, I remind him who still holds the keys. The morning after that phone call, I ironed my blouse. I sat at my desk and opened the bottom drawer. The key, taped to the underside, hadn't been touched in 6 years. I peeled it off slowly, like shedding a layer of softness I no longer needed. Inside were 3 leather folders, labeled, tabbed, time-stamped. They always thought I was sentimental, that I kept old paperwork because I couldn't let go. They never understood I was simply organized. 14 years ago, Eric came to me wide-eyed, hungry, fresh out of a failed startup, credit in ruins. He needed an office lease. No bank would touch him. I co-signed. No conditions, just belief. 12 years ago, I did more. Transferred 2 commercial buildings into his company's name, held in trust. His lawyer drew it up. My lawyer corrected it. The paperwork never left my hands. He never read it. Not fully, just smiled, signed, and called me a lifesaver. He always skimmed the fine print. I never did. The walls of my study are bare, but the air is dense, heavy with the quiet weight of receipts, of boundaries disrespected, of reverence gone cold. I opened the folder marked Trust and flipped to the clause I'd highlighted a decade ago. Ownership remains with grantor. Trustee retains revocation rights in full unless explicitly waived in writing. No waiver, no loophole, just his signature and mine in blue ink, neatly underlined. At 10:16 a.m., I called Martin Cho, my estate attorney for over 20 years. "Diana," he said, the warmth in his voice grounding me, "I was just reviewing your file. Everything is still exactly where we left it. I want to move forward," I told him. Martin didn't ask why. He already knew. "That trust," he said, "is your shield. You can pull back everything. One filing, no warning. One filing, not a fight, not a scream, just a pen and a decision." We scheduled an in-person for Friday. He asked if I was okay. I told him I would be, and I would, because it's one thing to be disrespected privately. It's another to realize your silence gave them the stage. Tomorrow I'll start clearing the set, and when the lights come up, he won't recognize the script. The next morning, I found out they'd told the children to ignore my calls. I'd just finished refilling the hummingbird feeder, the red one the twins gave me 3 birthdays ago, when my neighbor, Dolores, called from the sidewalk. "Diana, you didn't hear this from me, but my granddaughter overheard Lena talking at the swim club. Told the kids not to answer if Grandma's number comes up unless it's an emergency." I stood there holding a dripping bag of sugar water, heart pounding like I'd been caught trespassing in my own life. I hadn't missed a birthday. I baked their cakes by hand, shaped like dinosaurs and ballerinas, even last year when my arthritis was flaring. And now I was an emergency contact. That's all. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table and scrolled back through my texts. The last message from Chloe was 3 weeks ago, a photo of her holding up her spelling bee trophy. I'd replied with a dozen emojis, no response. Eric never even acknowledged the birthday brunch I'd planned last month. I told myself, maybe he forgot. But I hadn't forgotten the silence. I opened my desktop and pulled up the tax portal. I logged into the account I'd set up for the Franklin Commercial Group a decade ago. The one they never bothered to change because apparently passwords were beneath them. Everything was still in my name, all 5 commercial properties. Taxes? Still routed through my personal account, automatically. Every year. I printed the summaries. Paper receipts. Date stamped. Color-coded. Then I opened the drawer where I kept my late husband's cufflinks and tucked the documents beneath them. He would have told me to stop being so generous years ago, and I would have called him cynical. Now I just felt late. I stared out the window for a long time. The wind was picking up, bending the hydrangeas near the porch railing. They'd always bloomed best in the years when I felt most invisible. I took a deep breath. Then I picked up the phone and called Martin. "Move forward," I said again. My voice didn't shake this time. "We scheduled the filing for next Wednesday." By the time I arrived at Martin's office, the box in my hands held everything. Signed deeds, tax receipts, trust schedules with my name in bold typeface. All of it printed, stapled, and arranged so neatly it could have been mistaken for a college thesis. His assistant, June, looked up from her desk and gave me a warm smile. "Ms. Franklin, we've been expecting you. I'd been here dozens of times over the years, but never with my jaw set like this." Martin stepped out of his office wearing that same gray suit I remembered from Eric's first LLC filing, the one I paid for back when he still called me for advice. "Diana," he said, gesturing me inside, "I can't tell you how good it is to see you, though I wish it were under different circumstances." "I'm sure you can guess what this is about," I said, setting the box down. He smiled faintly. "Your email this morning was pointed." We sat across from each other, the weight of the last 2 decades spread between us in paper. Martin opened the folder labeled Franklin Trust Instruments, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. It took him 5 minutes to flip through the highlights. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "You've held up your end flawlessly. Not one clause breached, not one waiver executed. You retain full control." "And revocation?" I asked. "One form, one signature." He tapped the desk. "If you want, I can have it ready by Friday." I nodded slowly, heart steady. Martin hesitated, then pulled another file from his drawer. "You remember the time Eric came in with Lena? When they were looking to clean up the paperwork?" I did. "She wore white linen, called me sweetheart, and asked if I wanted help picking out a nursing home. Said it casually, like offering gum." Martin opened the file and slid out a photocopy of Eric's signature. He signed every amendment, every transfer confirmation. Never once questioned why his name wasn't listed as owner. He never asked. He never read. He skimmed. He smiled. He thanked you. My jaw clenched. Not from surprise. From insult. The insult of handing over an empire and being treated like the receptionist who forgot to order lunch. Martin folded his hands. "What exactly do you want to do, Diana?" "I want him to understand who he's talking to when he puts me on speakerphone and calls me an old hag." Martin didn't smile, but his eyes lit with something like satisfaction. "I'll draft everything." Before I left, I turned back and said, "Don't file it yet." "Oh?" "Let's give him a chance to show his real face first. Because the worst kind of fire doesn't start with flames. It starts with silence." Back home, I poured myself a drink, ginger ale, 2 ice cubes, and sat at my computer. I didn't feel victorious. I felt surgical. This wasn't about payback. Not anymore. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was going to teach him, not just what he owed, but what real respect costs. I opened my Outlook archive, the one nobody else knew existed. 27 folders, dated back to 2008. If Eric ever thought I was just good with paper, he never asked where the paper went. I searched for one phrase, "Thank you, Mom." Only 6 results came up. The 5th one was from June 11th, 2011. Subject line, "Couldn't have launched without you." I clicked it open. "Mom, I just walked through the doors of my new office. You did this. You believed when no one else would. Thank you for co-signing and for everything else you're about to help me figure out. Attached is the draft Lena's guy sent. We'll finalize it together. Love, Eric." There was a PDF attached. Trust transfer request. Draft never signed, never followed through. Because 2 weeks later, I had Martin rework the whole structure to protect him from himself. I remember thinking, he's still too green. Let me build the safety net. Let him focus on growing the business. I stared at the screen for a long time. He'd forgotten he ever wrote that email. But I hadn't. That version of him, humble, hopeful, vanished the moment his name went up on a building. The moment Lena started correcting my grammar in front of waiters. The moment I became background, I opened a fresh notebook and drew 3 columns. Leverage, boundaries, respect. I underlined each one. If I revoked his access now, he'd scream, fight, maybe lawyer up, but he'd miss the point. So instead, I'd show him. Leverage. I'd take one property offline. Something small but painful. Boundaries. I'd stop padding the tax account. Let him sweat a little. Respect. That would cost him something. And I'd set the price. It wasn't enough to take things back. He had to understand why they were never his to begin with. I printed the old email, folded it into an envelope, and slid it into the same drawer as my wedding ring. Proof that once, he knew what I was worth. Tomorrow morning, I'll begin. Not with a threat, but with a cancellation notice. At 7:58 a.m., I logged into the deed management portal with my reading glasses on and a steady hand. Franklin Commercial Group, Portfolio 5 Leasing Unit, 112B South Channel, the warehouse location. Not flashy, but strategic. It hosted vendor events, small tech expos, and, more recently, a networking gala Lena had been screeching about for weeks. The lease was due for auto-renewal in 10 days. I remembered because I programmed the alert into my calendar 7 years ago. I clicked Manage Lease Terms, selected Non-Renew, typed in the justification. Ownership review pending. Notice of non-renewal issued per Clause B17, subparagraph 3. No emotion, just code and control. I hovered for half a second, then clicked Submit. Timestamp, 8 a.m. status, notification delivered. I sat back, listening to the soft hum of my monitor. No sirens, no drama. But halfway across the city, Eric's phone just buzzed with a legal notification. He'd read it while pouring his coffee, probably half listening to Lena rattle off guest lists. I pictured the moment he blinked at the screen, waiting for it to make sense. It wouldn't, because in his mind, that building had been his for years. He forgot it even had a renewal clause, let alone that someone else controlled it. I waited 5 minutes. No call, no email. But at 8:14, the tenant's office manager, Sharon, a woman I'd met once at a business holiday luncheon, emailed me directly. Hi, Diana. Just got the lease notice. Can we confirm if this affects our upcoming access? We were told the event space was locked through Q2. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. Polite. Nervous. I replied, Hi, Sharon. Yes, the lease will not be renewed until ownership structure is reviewed. Any further use of the space is temporarily suspended. Thank you for reaching out. DF short, professional, razor-tipped. By 8:40, Lena's name appeared on my phone screen. I let it ring. Then watched a second later as a text popped up. Did you cancel the lease? That venue is for our event. Eric is furious. Can we talk? I placed my phone face down on the counter and went back to slicing apples. Control doesn't need volume. It needs timing. And now, one corner of Eric's kingdom is cracked, and he doesn't even know where the next one will come from. At 9:12 a.m., my phone rang again. Eric Franklin, all caps. No emojis, just like his tone. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Mom, did you? His voice was tight, fast, cracking. Did you accidentally mess with the lease on South Channel? I stood by the sink, wiping down the cutting board with steady strokes. No, Eric, it wasn't a mistake. A pause, just half a breath. What the hell does that mean? Lena's crying. We have 200 RSVPs, sponsors, lighting crews. I just had a walkthrough last night. I kept my tone flat. I reviewed the lease. I exercised my rights as owner. It's all been properly filed. You what? His voice broke higher. Wait, what are you even talking about? You don't. You're not. Eric? I said calmly. You've never owned that property. Silence. Then a low scoff, the one he used to give customer service reps when they said, That's not included in your plan. Oh, come on. You gave me those properties, remember? Years ago. I've been paying taxes, handling operations. No, I corrected. You've been operating under access. That access has always remained under my revocable trust. You signed it yourself. In Martin Cho's office. You're seriously pulling this now? Over what, a birthday brunch? A stupid phone call? I walked to the window and looked out over the street. A squirrel was digging furiously in my flower bed. You can frame it however you like, but nothing's changed except your awareness of the terms. He exhaled, long, sharp. Then his voice dropped into the register he used in meetings when he was trying to intimidate people with money talk. Okay, if you don't fix this, I'll get my lawyer involved. This is interfering with business contracts, public events. I will take legal action. I smiled then, just a little. Please do, I said. I'd be happy to forward them the trust documents. My name's still on every deed. He didn't speak. I heard Lena's voice in the background. Fast, shrill, muffled. Something crashed. A glass, maybe. Then a door slammed. Unbelievable, Eric muttered. You're going to sabotage your own son? I'm not sabotaging anything, I said. I'm protecting what I built. Then I ended the call. Because this wasn't sabotage. This was a syllabus. And class had just begun. That evening, I logged into the portfolio dashboard Martin had set up. Still had access. Same login from 2014. Franklin Commercial Group. Lending activity secured debt filings. Right pointing arrow loan agreement. Hashtag WZ minus 231. A secured against. 2,189. Charleston Boulevard Warehouse. 112B South. Channel 403. East Halstead. 3 of the 5 properties I'd placed in the trust. Loan amount, $2, $300,000, filed March 19, 2023. Lender, Statewide Business Capital. I stared at the screen. My fingers tingled. He'd used my holdings, trust assets I legally owned, as collateral for a multi-million-dollar business loan. And no one told me. Not a word. Not an email. Not a heads up. Just tacked it onto my portfolio like it was his to bargain with. My mouth went dry as I opened the attached documentation. Sure enough, his signature sat beneath the lender's declaration. Bold, confident, unreadable, even, like a teenager forging his mom's name on a field trip slip. Except this time, the field trip cost over $2 million. I kept scrolling. Clause 14C. In the event of material change in ownership, the lender reserves the right to revoke the loan and seize secured property assets. So if I revoke control, the loan goes into immediate default. Eric didn't just ride the safety net I gave him. He tied his career to it, gambled on it, bragged off the back of it. He leveraged something he never even truly owned. I printed everything, clipped the files, labeled them in red ink. And as I slid them into my briefcase, I realized what that moment was. Not the climax, the turning point. The empire wasn't his. It never was. And now I hold the debt, the keys, and the knife. The sky was starting to turn the color of burnt peach when I stepped out onto the porch with my tea. No phone, no emails, no agenda. Just me, a quiet evening, and a chair older than Eric's company. The street was still. A few children rode their bikes down the sidewalk, laughing that wild, breathless way only kids can. I watched them weave past the mailbox I'd repainted 2 summers ago. My hands rested in my lap, still, but inside, something shifted, because underneath the anger, there was grief. I thought of him as a boy, maybe 8, maybe 9, curled up on the living room floor with that giant hardcover astronomy book, the one with glow-in-the-dark planets on the cover. He used to trace the constellations with his finger, whispering the names under his breath like spells. Cassiopeia, Perseus, Orion. I'd come in from the kitchen with a mug of cocoa, and he wouldn't even look up. Just quietly say, "Mom, did you know Jupiter has 67 moons?" That boy, the one who dreamed in stars, used to make me feel like I was raising someone destined for more. Now here I was, years later, holding a legal file that proved my son built his empire on borrowed ground, and never once thought to say thank you. Or maybe worse, he thought he'd earned it all on his own. I sipped my tea, it had gone lukewarm. Did I do this? I asked out loud. Not to anyone, just to the air. Did I make him arrogant by shielding him too long? I'd made the tax payments quietly, co-signed things he never read, took on burdens he never even noticed. I didn't want to see him struggle. I wanted to make the world smoother for him than it ever was for me. And I did. I ironed the path so flat he never realized it had curves. But that's done now. This isn't revenge. I'm not here to punish him for forgetting who got him through his first bankruptcy. I'm here to remind him what it cost. Not with yelling, not with guilt, with facts, with filings, with consequences. The kind that come when the person you dismissed turns out to be the one holding your entire foundation. From inside, the landline rang once, then stopped. I didn't move. Because Eric isn't being ruined, he's being taught. And I'm the one giving the final lesson. Thursday morning, I emailed Eric's executive assistant, a woman named Jordan, always polite, always overworked, with a subject line that said everything and nothing. Subject, stakeholder review. Friday, 10 a.m. short body. Standard language. Hi, Jordan. Per our annual protocol, I'd like to schedule a stakeholder structure review for Friday morning. Please confirm Eric's availability. Diana Franklin, within 20 minutes, she replied. Hi, Diana. Yes, Friday at 10 a.m. works. I'll reserve the conference room. Best, Jordan. I imagine the way she must have leaned into Eric's office after reading it aloud, how he probably waved her off without a second thought. He thinks this is a formality. An old woman ticking boxes. He doesn't know I'm bringing Marcia Keene. Marcia and I met in 1984. When we both invested in a run-down retail complex on Harmon Street. She had 3 kids. I had a mortgage and a half-finished degree. We split a bottle of red wine after signing the deal and promised to never let a man talk us out of our own instincts again. She's the silent partner behind Eric's 5th property, holds 10% ownership, sits on nothing, votes on nothing, watches everything. And she's tired of being polite. I called her Wednesday night. You still own your slice of Halstead, right? I asked. Unless your son filed a coup I missed, yes. Why? Because I'm done whispering. There was a pause, then the kind of laugh only women in their 70s can earn. Low, knowing, unbothered. I've got a blazer and a fountain pen that haven't been used in a while. I'll be there. Now Friday's meeting was set. On paper, it was a stakeholder review, no alarm bells. But in truth, it was a mirror. I was walking Eric into a room where every signature he ignored would be laid out, page by page, not by rage, not by argument, by record. I packed my briefcase that night like I used to pack his school lunches, carefully, precisely, with a quiet kind of love that now had an edge to it. Martin would be there too. He didn't need an invitation. He helped build the structure Eric forgot to respect. Let him watch it reintroduced, one clause at a time. The conference room was all glass, polished concrete, and artificial warmth. Eric had remodeled it last spring. Lena had picked out the chairs, gold-accented leather. Too firm. I arrived at 9:50. Marcia followed me in gray silk blouse, red lipstick, and a tote bag full of hell. Martin came in last, briefcase in hand. Eric waltzed in at 10:02. Lena trailed behind him, already frowning. Tight white blazer, sunglasses on top of her head like she was late for brunch. Let's keep this quick, Eric said, setting his phone on the table. We've got vendor calls at 11. I'm sure we'll be efficient, I said, placing my notes on the table. This is a stakeholder structure review after all. He gave a short laugh. Smug, practiced. Mom, you don't need to do this whole legacy theater thing. We know how the company's built. We're literally in it. You're in it, I said, keeping my tone flat. But you didn't build it alone. Marcia cleared her throat. And you're not the only one who's been watching. Eric blinked. Sorry, who invited? 10%, she said, nodding. And a hell of a memory. He scoffed. Actually scoffed, like we were a bunch of sentimental women in over our heads. Martin Cho opened his briefcase. I think, he said, this will clarify things. He pulled out a manila folder and placed it gently in front of Eric, thicker than a menu, heavier than it looked. What is this? Eric asked, not reaching for it. Your foundation, I said, in writing. Eric opened the folder. The first page. Trust Schedule A. Property assignments. My signature. His. Dated. Notarized. The next. lease control clauses, revocable terms. Then, 2012 agreement, conditional transfer with retained ownership rights. Martin stayed quiet. He just turned each page like a dealer laying down cards. Lena leaned over to read, lips pressed so tight they almost disappeared. "This doesn't mean anything," Eric said too quickly. "We've been operating these properties for years. No one's contested that." "Because I didn't," I said calmly. "Until now." He looked up. "You're trying to embarrass me? Over what? Ego? That dumb lease cancellation? You used my properties as collateral for a $2.3 million loan," I said. "And you never owned them." That hit. He looked at Martin. Martin didn't flinch. "Collateral without legal ownership is, at best, misrepresentation. At worst, fraud," Marcia finished. "And foolish." Eric stood abruptly. "You're bluffing." "I'm filing," I said. "Revocation. Full." He looked at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. That's fine, he never really tried. Eric hadn't moved from his chair, but the stillness was starting to fray. He kept glancing between pages, fingers twitching like he couldn't decide whether to flip or tear. Lena hadn't spoken in 5 minutes. Marcia leaned forward and tapped the table gently with her pen. "I've been a quiet investor for 11 years, she said, voice steady. "Didn't say a word when you remodeled Halstead without notice. Or when the tenant complaints started rolling in about your event staff skimming fees." Eric looked up, mouth opening. Marcia raised her hand. "I'm not done." He closed it. She smiled. "We've both been quiet investors long enough," she said, turning slightly toward me. "But Eric, you've let your ego outrun your paperwork. That's a dangerous thing in this business," he scoffed, trying to recover the ground beneath him. "You all act like I built this on lies, like I'm just some kid who got lucky." "I don't think you got lucky," I said. "I think you got entitled." He stared at me, angry, still trying to find the version of me he could control, the one who'd shrink when he raised his voice or tossed out legal threats. That woman wasn't in this room. "If this is about control," he said, "we can negotiate." "No," I said plainly. "We can't." He leaned back. "So what? You'll blow up everything? Sell it off just to prove a point?" Martin cleared his throat but didn't speak. This was my moment. "If I'm just an old hag," I said, "feel free to walk away from the properties I own." That shut him up. Completely. Lena's head turned sharply toward him, waiting. "You're not serious?" he said quietly. I didn't blink. "Try me." Marcia reached for her bag, pulled out a second manila folder, thinner but stamped with her signature. "I'm backing her," she said. "Effective immediately. I want quarterly reports and full voting rights reinstated on Halstead. Retroactive. You can't just—" "We can," I said, "and we are." Eric pushed the chair back. Stood too fast. The sound of the legs scraping the floor echoed across the glass. "This is a mistake," he muttered. "You'll ruin everything." I gathered the papers into a neat stack, slid them back into my folder. "No, Eric," I said. "For the first time in years, I'm fixing it." I hadn't noticed her during the meeting, but when we stepped out into the hallway, she was pretending to sort files by the copier. Eric's assistant, Jordan. She kept her head down, eyes moving too fast across blank papers. She'd heard everything, and I knew better than to ask her not to repeat it. You can't muzzle the walls, especially when the building has open glass conference rooms and assistants paid too little to ignore power shifts when they happen in front of them. By Sunday, the air had changed. It started with a text from Dolores. Did something happen with Eric's business? Brenda mentioned something at church about legal confusion, and I just smiled and nodded. Then came the LinkedIn notification. Franklin Group, board structure update. In review, I hadn't touched my profile in 4 years. Suddenly, I had 7 new connection requests, 3 from board members I hadn't seen since Eric's second expansion. That night, I received a voicemail from an unfamiliar number, Midwestern accent, professional tone. "Hi, Ms. Franklin. I sit on the Financial Oversight Committee for Franklin Group. We've received conflicting information about asset ownership. When available, we'd appreciate clarification. Thank you." They didn't say the word, but I heard it between the lines. Liability. By Monday afternoon, Lena's name had disappeared from the RSVP list for the Colonial Women's Spring Luncheon. I didn't even belong to the club, but somehow, I still knew. Word travels fastest in rooms where people drink expensive wine and pretend not to care who paid for it. Eric hadn't called since the meeting, neither had Lena, but late Monday evening I checked the company calendar, the one still linked to my old admin access. Tuesday, emergency board meeting, 3:30 p.m., no agenda, no notes, just red text and silence. I closed the laptop, then stood at the mirror and took off my earrings. There's a difference between revenge and revelation. I didn't tell anyone what happened in that room. I didn't have to. Eric built a kingdom on glass, and all I did was let them see inside. By Friday morning, the filings were done. Every deed, every lease, every property Eric ever boasted about, signed back into my sole control. Martin handed me the stamped confirmations, neat as gravestones. I didn't pause. I didn't hesitate. By noon, Franklin Commercial Group was stripped bare. No operating rights, no property portfolio, no collateral left to shield him. Except one thing, that loan. $2.3 million, bound in his name, secured against assets he never actually owned. I pulled everything out from under him, but I left that debt nailed to his chest like a millstone. And the lender? They'd be coming, fast. By Monday, word was everywhere. Investors withdrew. His assistant resigned by email. Vendors demanded payment up front. Lena's friends stopped answering her texts. I didn't have to move a finger. I'd already set the dominoes. When the board called me, not him, for confirmation of ownership, I answered with a single line. I am the owner. He was the operator. That distinction is now over. Eric didn't call, not to yell, not to threaten, not even to beg. Instead, his silence thickened, spreading like smoke. I pictured him sitting in that office he thought was his kingdom, the glass walls closing in, the phone buzzing with calls he couldn't answer. Property gone, reputation gone, and the loan still there, unpaid, unforgiving. Because when you gamble with something you never owned, you don't just lose, you collapse. I didn't ruin my son. I revealed him. To his board, to his wife, to himself. And I left him the only thing he truly earned. The crushing weight of a debt he tied to my name, thinking I'd never let him fall. But I did. That is the last gift I'll ever give him. Not mercy, not forgiveness, just silence. And a $2.3 million reminder that his empire was never his. It was mine, and now it's gone.